the meeting, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the land in which we meet, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and also extend that respect to other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are with us here this evening. Item 1 on the agenda is membership. Membership is as listed in the agenda, with the exception of Councillor Lawrence, who is on an approved leave of absence and an apology. Item 2, apologies. There is apologies from Councillor Williams, and Councillor Newton will join us shortly. Item 3, disclosures of conflicts of interest. Are there any disclosures, councillors? No. Thank you. Item 4, confirmation of the minutes of council meetings. That's moved by Councillor McCarthy and seconded by Councillor Rennie. All those in favour? That motion is carried. Moving now to item 5, question and submission time. We've received a lot of questions on the email to respond to this evening. So usually I end up reading out all of the questions and answers, but tonight I've decided to share it around so you don't have to listen to me for a long time. So most councillors have a question that they'll be responding to, and the CEO. So we might start with Councillor Rennie.
This was a question from Andrew Apollini of Thornbury.
You just might check if the question is in the audience and wants to read out their question.
Yes, is Andrew in the audience? Thank you. Andrew writes, my question relates to Stott Street and Thornbury, specifically the stretch of car parking between Hutton Street and Normanby Avenue. Over the past 1 month, I have reported on several occasions via social media, Facebook, that ever-increasing problem of dumped rubbish within the space between the road and the train tracks. Items that have been dumped within the past month include 3 couches, 2 washing machines and numerous garbage bags of household waste. As I write this question, there are 3 bags of rubbish dumped beside the pedestrian rail crossing at Smith Street, a trolley full of rubbish lying in the car parking spaces and several plastic milk cartons and food packings scattered across the gravel. These items have remained for 2 weeks now. This is not to mention the orange chair lodged up in a tree above the Smith Street pedestrian rail crossing on the Clapham Street side of the tracks. What will it require for the Council to implement a strategy to combat this ever-increasing issue? Are ratepayers required to pick up for the Council? Is a simple sweep and pick up of rubbish through the car parking 1 time per week excessive? Can this not be done? And our response. An authorised officer has attended the site today and Council's street cleansing unit is expected to clean up the area within the next 48 hours. Areas along the rail corridor are particularly problematic as much of the areas fall with Metro or VicTrack. An officer will be in touch with Metro, VicTrack and Public Transport Victoria to discuss a joint approach to this issue. Officers will also increase patrols in this area, particularly on weekends, in an effort to deter further dumped rubbish. In general, Council's approach to dump rubbish includes engagement, enforcement and a collection service where there is no enforcement possible. Council also provides a host of waste services to prevent dumping, including weekly collection and twice yearly hard rubbish services. Council's Waste and Litter Strategy Action Plan 2017 to 2020 includes 58 actions which target prevention and response to litter and dumped rubbish issues over the next 3 years. A key action in the next financial year is the development of a municipality-wide litter and dumped rubbish reduction campaign. Your comments will be considered as part of the development of this campaign.
Thank you, Councillor Rennie. Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mayor. So the second question is from Rosemary Popovska from Northcote. I'll just check if Rosemary's here. I understand Rosemary probably wasn't going to be attending this evening, so I'll read out Rosemary's question. The question is, I would like to ask if there is any intention to redevelop Northcote Leisure Centre on Victoria Street. These facilities are in desperate need for an extensive renovation. These facilities are extremely poor. So the response is, thank you for your question. Council is currently undertaking a feasibility study to investigate the possibility, including the extent of a redevelopment of the Northcote Aquatic and Recreation Centre. This study will be reviewed by Council in the coming months. And there's also a note here to say that anyone, including Rosemary obviously, would also like more information to please contact the Council's Leisure Department, leisure@darebin.vic.gov.au. And I understand that that response will be provided in writing to Rosemary as well.
Thank you.
If I may, Mayor, I have a motion specifically in regards to that that question that's been asked.
The Northcote Aquatic and Recreation.
Oh, sorry, is it the reservoir or the Northcote?
No, it's Northcote.
So I had an item in relation to the reservoir leisure centre.
No worries. Thank you, Councillor Greco. Councillor Amir, your question. Oh, I'm just going around the table.
All right. So this is from Robin Vogt from Preston. Robin, are you here? Did you want to read the question?
We'll just get you a microphone.
What steps has Council undertaken to explore the options available to enable the continuation of the delivery of aged care services by Council beyond 2020?
So this is a question we've had a lot of interest from the community recently. So the City of Darebin has participated in a number of regional projects to explore the impact of changes that the Commonwealth Aged Care Reform introduces to the sector and what options local government providers will have when the reforms are fully rolled out to the Commonwealth in 2020. So it's been happening over the last few months. In response to reforms that have come into effect already, we've aligned our program to ensure that we continue to provide quality services and programs that meet the needs of older people in Darebin. We're undertaking a large consultation project to understand the needs of older people in Darebin into the future and explore ways that allow us to continue to meet the needs in a changing environment as further impacts of reform become evident. We're still informing the community about what changes we know so far and seeking their input to shape our services into the future. This is an ongoing process as the final model of Commonwealth reforms is not yet fully known and no decision has been made. Can I ask what residents should do if they want to contribute to the feedback process? So you can contact the CEO if you have want to make a contribution to the feedback process. So no decision's been made yet.
Thank you, Councillor Mead. There is a second question. Did you want to ask your second?
Oh, mine, yes.
Yes.
Is there a councillor who works in the aged care industry? And if so, why is this councillor not required to declare a conflict of interest when matters relating to aged care are discussed or voted at council?
So the Local Government Act is quite clear on the process for declaring a conflict of interest, and it is whether or not, regardless of who works where, that's not an issue. It's up to each individual councillor to either seek advice on whether they have a conflict or to manage that conflict themselves. CEO, did you want to add anything more to that? Okay, thank you. Councillor Messina.
Question 4. Is David Isdale in the audience this evening?
David Isdale.
David Isdale from Preston's question is, as the Batman by-election has now concluded, please advise of the process undertaken by Council in reminding the prospective parties of the removal of the campaign signage and what the time period is for completion. I note that additionally that the Stop Adani signage is sponsored and approved by the Greens and would be governed by the same process and presumably undertaken by them at their cost. Thank you for your question, and the response is, a process started before the by-election to ask various parties to comply the requirements of the Council's local law. Now that the by-election has been conducted, Council will again follow up to ensure that all inappropriate signage material is removed.
Thank you, Councillor Messina. The next question is from Linton from Reservoir, and the question is, the Edwards Lake Athletics track is in need for a refurbishment. There are bumps across the track which can affect results, and the track is also very flat, which makes the track very slow. Have the Council thought about the idea for a long-awaited new track for Edwards Lake? If the track gets given the all-clear to be redeveloped, an idea would be to extend the track by 2 lanes. As an athlete, I would love a new track at Edwards Lake for me to train and compete on. And the response is that Council has provided funding in the 17-18 budget to review the existing conditions of the track and undertake site investigations in preparation for a potential track redevelopment in 18-19. So the investigations are happening this financial year with the option to redevelop it next financial year. Council has worked closely with the user groups, who are Preston Reservoir Little Aths Club and Preston Athletics Club, throughout this process to ensure the scope of works is beneficial to both the athletes and the local community. Detailed design works are currently in progress and will be presented to Council for consideration in June. Upon finalisation and endorsement of the detailed design, preparation for construction is scheduled to commence subject to budget funding. And There are 3 questions that all relate to the same issue. So I'll read out each individual question. Oh, I think you're all in the audience, actually. Sorry, yes? Yes, sure. Sorry about that. So Tracy Tyrrell, yes, did you want to read out your question? So there are 3... Okay, all right. So there's Tracy Tyrrell, Chris DeRoe, do I pronounce your name right? Sorry. And Karina Robinson, who all have questions relating to Johnson Park. Are you all happy for me to just keep reading? Okay. So, question from Tracy Tyrrell. Can the following 2 questions please be submitted for the question time at tonight's council meeting in relation to Johnson Park, Basing Street, Northcote? Why was there no action taken in relation to the recommendation in the council meeting minutes 16 May 2016, item 6.2, proposed dog off-lead area in Johnson Park, Northcote? And question 2 is, are council willing to review the current situation at Johnson Park again, taking the views of all park users into account? And you have also attached some analysis of parks in Darebin in relation to accessibility to off-lead dog areas, showing how underrepresented both Northcote and Fairfield are in relation to other suburbs in Darebin. The questions from Chris. Given the history of community engagement and citizens taking responsibility for the care of Johnson Park, and the fact that there are variations in community opinion about the management of dogs in the park, is council willing to facilitate, mediate a meeting of representatives of all types of park users to reach mutual agreement on an acceptable solution? Pending the final decision on, question 2, pending the final decision on which is the most suitable option, could the council indicate a minimum $20,000 in this year's budget to provide an off-lead solution for Johnson Park, including the possibility of a dog-friendly fenced area with multiple access gates, water source and dog bag dispenser? And the questions from Karina is council aware that there are a large number of Johnson Park users who are very unhappy with the current dog policy, who have been trying for over 3 years now to get a more equitable access to Johnson Park with an off-lead solution? Is the council willing to work with the Johnson Park Users Group to develop a layout of a fenced area for off-lead dogs that meets all needs, for example, where gates should be, water sources for dogs, bag dispensers? So the response to all of those 3 questions is that in 2016, council considered the use of Johnson Park as a dog off-lead area, and at the time, council, as you know, resolved not to create a dog off-lead area at that time. Council has just about to begin consultation on our open space strategy, which will look at the needs of the community across Darebin in terms of their access to open space and the different types of uses that they may need now and into the future. And so through that process, I would encourage you to provide your feedback to take this issue forward. CEO.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I've got a question from Maria Poletti. Would you like to read your question?
Maria Poletti, Garden President and usual suspect. Last council meeting there was a question regarding the use of flammable cladding on buildings in Darebin. Thank you for the expression of concern in your answer. However, there was no indication of or if the public can see the data on the 48 buildings that were highlighted for further inspection in the report. The Council of 2016, your Council, came to an agreement not to call for division in planning committee meetings.
CEO will respond to those 5 questions.
Thank you for the questions. With regard to the release of the addresses of the buildings that potentially have suspect or dangerous cladding, this is a process that's still actually very much in the hands of the state government. It's very early days. The state has appointed a task force to lead the response to this issue on a metropolitan Victoria-wide process. In doing that, what they've done, the task force are partnering with the Victorian Building Authority, who've done a pilot with 5 councils. Not Moreland was one, Darebin wasn't one of the 5. So at this point, the VBA are the ones that hold the information, and council doesn't actually have the addresses for the properties that are suspected. They're going through a cleansing data cleansing process at the moment. So I actually don't have that information, but we're very alive to the issue and very much staying in touch with the VBA. So that's the latest on that. With regard to the release of the Preston Market Heritage Study, you would be aware that this is a matter for council this evening via notice of motion. What I can say though is that the Social Heritage Report was prepared by a consultant team and is a piece of really quite unique and pioneering research. It looks into the buildings and the social history of the market. Typically new research requires peer review, and I think that's probably really important in this, given the significance of this topic for council and the community. And this is in order to ensure that the findings are validated. At this point, the report is confidential because the peer review hasn't been completed, and we want to make sure that the report is, as robust and defensible as possible when the time comes. We're working in partnership with the VPA, the community is well aware of that, on the review of the Preston Market Planning Controls, and we will share all relevant information with the VPA and the community when this report is finished. This consultation is currently at stage 1, which is focused on identifying the valued and unique elements of the market informed by the community's feedback. With regard to the recording of voting on all decisions of the Planning Committee, the local law provides, so the local law, meeting procedure local law applies to planning committees as well, and provides for the recording of opposition voting to be made when requested by councillors. With regard to...
just to add to that, that local law was reviewed last year.
Yeah, sorry.
And we're likely to review the local law again once the new Local Government Act is passed, if it passes, and so that is expected later this year.
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Mayor. And then just finally, Maria, with regard to the question about the review of the Darebin planning scheme and the MSS, I'm delighted to advise that the review of the planning scheme is now commenced. And as you know, the purpose of the review is to ensure that the scheme can provide a more strategic response to address the community's expectations balanced with the requirements of the state government. This process will be driven by a full engagement process during the 2018-2019 year. So we are definitely, I'm happy to say I'm happy to be open and say we're behind on schedule, but we're hoping to catch up. So that's very much a piece in progress. I think there was a question about the review of the Planning Committee Charter.
Yes, it was.
So the response to that is that the Planning Committee Charter was reviewed and updated in July 2017, but the intent is not to review the Charter again, but having said that, I'd be very happy to take a discussion offline, Maria, and understand what the specific concerns are, just to understand those fully.
Thank you.
I also have a submission for the later item.
Yes.
I understand from the website you can make.
Yes, I have your name. You'd like to make it now?
Yeah, if I can.
Yeah, that's fine. So it's a submission in relation to 10.1, which is the release of the confidential Preston Market Heritage Study. So you'll have, I think it's 2 minutes, which I'll keep an eye on the timer. Thanks.
Okay. There should be no doubt that the community, both within and beyond Darebin, love the Preston Market and continue to be personal memories of the market. In short, the heritage of the market, its people, produce and permanent structure of key interest and concern to the community. Comments in letters written to the Minister for Planning, Richard Wynne, highlight the importance of heritage. Preston Market is not only iconic and part of our rich cultural history, but a thriving current and vital part of our present future. Correspondent. Another said, my affiliation with the market dates back to the 1970s when my late father worked as a butcher there. And another said, recently an elderly assistant told me that his family were about 5 generations living in Preston and that the original Preston market was on an alternative site before moving to the current site slated for redevelopment. This means that the market existed for more than 50 years and while it may not meet heritage criteria for the current person, surely the market itself meets heritage criteria and should be protected as such. The community continues to be concerned about the loss of heritage at Preston Market because of developer ambition. So much so that some are prepared to give a considerable chunk of their own time and zero remuneration to be involved in a consultation with the Victorian Planning Authority in order to ensure that there will be better protections for the market within the new incorporated plan. The very least you could do, Council, would be to assist in removing this and vote to release the public for public consideration of the Preston Market Heritage Site.
Thank you for that submission. We'll move now on to the next question, which is from Chris Erlandson. Would you like to read out your question? Yes.
My question too is in relation to the heritage report and its release. I think you may have addressed some of the things that my question is about too, but I'll read it anyway because it has a slightly different title. The community urges Council to release the heritage report to make the report public for all to read and to analyse the recommendations contained within. As well, we would like to think that Council will use this heritage report to support and guide their own independent submission for the new incorporated plan that will be developed and presented to the VPA. If Council does not intend to implement or apply the recommendations contained in the heritage report in their own submission to the VPA, then what is the purpose of the report? And I should just add in there, if it was being prepared for VCAT, it missed that because it wasn't ready. And if it's not going to be applied in this current situation, which I would have thought was absolutely important for the outcome of the implementation of the incorporated plan, that would have to be built into it. So I have two questions really. One, why is the heritage report delayed so long? And why was it made confidential? Considering that earlier report was not made confidential. My second, would you like to talk to that first? You feel you've done?
Yeah, I feel that I have. Really the answer is that it's not finished at this point, and so to release it would be premature and could actually prejudice the intent and the whole purpose of doing a report in the first place.
Okay. My second question is, will Council use the heritage report to support the independent submission for the new Preston Central Incorporated plan that will be developed and presented to the VPA as the community has already done as part of the consultation process?
Yeah, so Chris, again, I feel like I've responded to that question. It really, can't equivocally say, but the purpose of the report is to inform Council's position with regard to the market. So that's the whole purpose of conducting a report. But I haven't read the report at this point, so I can't actually say what it is that we will do with it definitively until I've read it. But certainly the purpose was to support Council's position as we go through a process of working with the state and the community to develop the planning controls for the site for the future.
Okay. Did you want to make your submission to? I noticed that you've got your name on the list. Did you want to make your submission now or later in the evening? To the notice of motion. No? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. We've gotten through all of the questions that we have received before the meeting online. Are there any further questions from the gallery? Rhoda Serena.
Thanks, Madam Mayor, and I understand you need to take this question on notice. Noting that the recently signed comprehensive and progressive trans-Pacific partnership agreement, the CPTPP, was signed on the 8th of March and will impact Council's ability to make future decisions due to provisions of the Services Chapter and the risk of multinational corporations suing Council using investor-state dispute settlement. Will the Council, one, work with sister councils Northland and Yarra to campaign against the CPTPP and submit individual and or joint submissions to the public inquiry process? Two, write to the Trade Minister, the Opposition, crossbenchers, Senator Darren Lynch and Member for Batman to support, one, the Senate inquiry into the CPTPP, and two, support an independent assessment of the economic, health and environmental impacts of the CPTPP. Those are the two questions, and having recently asked about timelines, I'm not sure about timelines. The agreement is out in New Zealand and they've done some initial assessments. DEPA has done some initial assessments which are on the website. My feeling is the time that it would be happening pretty well soon. I think it would be time in 2 weeks that this kind of public inquiry process is likely to kick off. If it's not kicked off through at least the Joint Standing Committee on Treaties, then that makes the Senate inquiry even more complicated.
Thank you. We'll take the question on notice, but I will say that through an urgent business item that we're considering this evening, which will look at our motions that we put to the Australian Local Government Association Assembly. So that is an assembly of all local governments across Australia that come together. We will be putting forward a motion to, well, it is proposed that we put forward a motion about this to that assembly for their consideration. My only concern about that is the timing of that. Yes. But we will take the question on notice and consider the actions that you've asked us to undertake. Thank you. We'll go over to Manny.
A simple but a vexed question, Madam Mayor, Madam CEO. Does the council have an ethics policy? Is it advertised? And what happens if a whistleblower wants to be ethical, and how can it be implemented by council?
I'll refer the question to the CEO because there is legislation that refers to this and a protected disclosure officer. So, CEO.
Thank you for the question. So there's legislation specifically pertaining to protected disclosures, so whistleblower legislation, if you like. So, and at the moment I'm actually the protected disclosure officer. So if someone wanted to raise a concern via that legislation, I'm the person to contact. Alternatively, there are a number of other mechanisms, so through Local Government Victoria, through the Victorian Government Inspectorate, through IBAC, the Broad-Based Anti-Corruption. So there's multiple opportunities. The legislation and the Code of Conduct, so there's a Local Government Act that governs council, which you'd be well aware of, as well as a Code of Conduct which, you know, talks to the ethics of the council's conduct. And corruption is specifically prevented through legislative requirements. So hopefully that answers your question.
Would you like? Sorry, can we?
There's a code
of conduct that the councillors all sign up to at the start of our term. And if we don't, then we can't take our position as a councillor. Thank you. John Nugent.
My question is about the council restructuring. How is council getting rid of middle management when they're usually the backbone between the bosses and the public and so forth? Last Friday we lost a good worker and so forth who knew what was going on with the council, but now I asked a person a question and the person did not know the answer. I said, well, who do I speak to? Do I have to ring the CEO to get an answer, or is there somebody now be able to answer the question I've got?
Could you respond to that?
Yeah, so thank you for the question, John. There's certainly been a review of the organisation structure that occurred, quite extensively before Christmas and is in the process of being implemented. Following the election of the new council and the introduction of the new, the adoption of the new council plan, the council has determined its priorities, and it was incumbent on me as the CEO to make sure that the organisation was organised structurally in such a way to ensure that we were able to be successful in delivering council and the community's aspirations for the future. So that's the purpose of the restructure. From an industrial relations perspective, there are legal obligations to go through when you introduce change into an organisation. That is particularly true in local government. It's a heavily regulated space. So some positions have been spilled, so that the extent of change has been such that some positions have been vacated, which has necessitated going to market in an open merits-based process. As a result of that process, I'm absolutely delighted with the calibre of the candidates that we're attracting, and in fact it's led to the appointment of a new executive team who I'm pleased to introduce tonight. That's not to say that the people that have left the organisation haven't been fine ambassadors for the City of Darebin. They absolutely have. And it's not to say they don't have incredible skills. And I won't talk to specific people because I don't think that's ethical, but what I will do is say that they've left the organisation on great terms. They can be incredibly proud of everything that they've achieved, and they go with my absolute blessing and best wishes. In terms of the period in between, while we settle a new leadership team, and certainly you might find that the person that you used to call to answer all the questions is not the person you call. Hopefully I'm not the person that you call for all of your questions, because you might find that I then have to call a few people. But in the interim, I'm really happy to understand what the nature of the concerns are and find the right person for you, John.
Thank you. And we're now at time for the questions and submission time. So I'll thank everybody who came along and asked a question. But we'll now move to item 6, which is...
Mayor, if I may, I can move a procedural motion.
Yes.
Just in relation to the notice of motion that I have.
Yes.
If we could bring that forward to be heard after urgent motions.
Yes.
Yep, thank you.
So is there a seconder for that procedural motion? That's seconded by Councillor Amir. All those in favour? Motion is carried. So we'll move now to item 6, which is petitions. Are there any petitions? No. Item 7, urgent business. There is there is 2 items of urgent business. So we'll move first to the MAV State Conference and ALGA National General Assembly.
Jody.
Sorry, we're just trying to work out the right process so that we don't... Okay. Okay. There's a couple of pages of this. Councillor McCarthy?
Can I ask...
Yeah, so the first thing we need to do is admit this as an urgent business item.
I was happy to support moving to admit it, but I was just going to ask procedurally whether...
Once we admit it, we can ask how we work through it.
process.
So is someone happy to move the item of urgent business? Thank you. That's moved by Councillor McCarthy and seconded by Councillor Rennie. All those in favour? That motion's carried. So I was just conferring with the CEO about how to deal with this, and what we can do is consider them there's two options. We can consider each of them as individual motions, each motion that will go to MAV, or we consider them as one entire motion, but then vote on each of the individual motions. Each of the individual points.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Mayor, I think for clarity,
Yes.
I think it would be better that we address them and try to be brief.
So if you consider it as one,
Individually?
consider them as individual motions. Okay, we'll be here for a while, but that's okay. Okay, so the first item, sorry, I don't have it on the screen. Is there, that screen's on. So we'll first go to Councillor Greco on the MAV motion for the Victorian local government profile. Councillor Greco, so we'll get a seconder. Is there a seconder for that one? Seconded by Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Greco.
Okay, very quickly, thank you for seconding the motion. Basically, this motion is about setting up is actually establishing, getting the MAV to commission a report on the demographics and the composition of the local government sector in Victoria. And the idea behind the report is that the state government has a report in relation to the state public service. That is, who works for the public service, what is the gender balance in the public service, what's the diversity in the public service. We don't have that base information in the local government sector. We often talk about how the local government sector should be more diversified. We often talk about how in the local government sector, both at the council level and also at the administrative level, what the demographics of the administrations and also the composition of councillors and mayors are. And I think it's about time and useful that this information is collated together so it can actually help the MAV and also decision makers in terms of ensuring that the local government sector actually is not only the sector that's closest to the people, that best reflects the people that it represents. So what I'm trying to do through this motion is to advocate to the MAV that this sort of report is commissioned. It's long overdue. There's a lot of rhetoric with the MAV and many councils about diversity, gender diversity within councils, cultural diversity within councils. But after 30 years of being an advocate in this space, I've seen very, very little being developed because we don't even have the base data. So what this report tries to do, if we're able to convince other MAV council members through our representative Susan Rennie, is to get this report up and going. There's nothing new about this. The state government already does this, as I mentioned, for the state government and public service. It's just a question of replicating this for the local government sector. So I urge councillors to support this motion so that we can advocate to our council colleagues that this piece of work, important piece of work, finally gets done.
Thank you, Councillor Greco.
I'd like to make or suggest an amendment to the motion.
We might, okay, yes. Well, would you like to put, actually, we might hear from Councillor McCarthy first.
I'm happy to hold back as the seconder and just hear the
all right.
amendment.
Councillor Rennie, would you like to put forward your amendment?
The amendment would be that the MAV seek funding from the state government to produce a report on the profile of local government similar to the existing State of the Public Service report. Do you want me to read that more slowly?
So that's to replace all of those words.
Replace all of those words.
Do you want to read it out again?
Sure. That the MAV seek funding from state government to produce a report on the profile of local government similar to the existing State of the Public Service report.
Councillor Greco,
Look,
do you accept those new words?
It's difficult for me to accept that amendment because what the amendment says is about seeking funding. What my motion talks about.
Okay, so you're going into debate, so we will hold that there. Do you want to put that forward as a motion to amendment motion?
Yes.
Is there a seconder for that? That's seconded by Councillor Amir. So Councillor Rennie.
Thank you. I've suggested this motion picking up the very commendable idea that Councillor Greco has to actually build a profile so that we have baseline data and understand the nature of the employment and the workforce within local government. However, I think that what I'm trying to avoid is the ambiguity in Councillor Greco's motion around either commissioning or seeking state government funding. I think they're two very, very different things. I think one is likely to be successful at MAV. I think the other is going to be very unlikely to be successful. And rather than have a motion which ultimately I think will fail because of the two components, I would like to propose a motion that I think is more likely to succeed. And I think ultimately it's the responsibility of the state government to fund this very commendable and worthwhile piece of work.
Thank you. Councillor Amir.
Just seconding the comments made by Councillor Rennie, who I know has a great deal of experience in in local government, including working with TIC bodies. The intent, as has been said by Councillor Greco, is really excellent. I think by specifically referencing the State of the Public Service Report, it creates a baseline, a guidelines of to be really clear about what we're looking for to create that equal level of information that's being sought.
Thank you. Are there further speakers? Councillor Greco.
Yeah, look, if I may, look, I understand what Councillor Reddy and her intent behind the amendment, but look, I feel frankly that it doesn't go far enough, because what the amendment is saying is that the MAV ought to pursue funding. The motion that I have put is about the MAV commissioning a report of this nature and or seeking funds from the state government to make this report happen. Now, I've been an MAV representative. We've asked the MAV to pursue lots of things, and lots of things actually get lost in the advocacy. What my motion does, it puts the heat on the MAV to actually fund a report, because it's within the MAV's responsibility to fund a report about the local government sector and the composition and the demographics of the local government sector. If it gets money from the state government, great. But the onus must be on the MAV and making this report happen. And I think that we need to be much stronger in terms of the types of motions that we put before the MAV. I know that when it comes to other issues, we're quite strong in our position. We need to be strong in relation to this position. And I'll just finally end on this note, like I said when I was speaking to the motion. Look, some of us have been involved in this sector for 30 or 40 years. We always hear words like pursue, seek, let's advocate, but very, very little gets done, because the heat never gets put on organisations to actually match the rhetoric that they talk about and put their monies in their pockets and actually at least develop some baseline data, which is lagging behind by 30 years. So I urge councillors to consider my motion that I have put up, which I think is stronger and fits in with the leadership role that this council plays.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Are there any further speakers to the amendment? Councillor McCarthy.
Look, as the seconder, I was interested in where the argument might go on this. I am swayed by Councillor Rennie's alternative, and I do so because I know how hard it is to get motions through the MAV State Conference and State Council from time to time, because the issues that Councillor Greco has raised, which I completely understand and agree with in terms of the importance of this work, and the fact that it doesn't exist at the moment, at least at a statewide scale, I think we need to actually think about the smartest approach to position MAV to take this forward. And if the starting point is to say MAV either does it or asks the state to fund it, I can tell you what the state's going to say, which is, you do it. This is a significant piece of work. It needs to get done. I completely agree with Councillor Greco on that point. But tactically and strategically, I think it makes more sense to get the MAV to agree with the concern, first and foremost, and then the funding question becomes a secondary issue. I don't think we want to go into the MAV trying to make the case to country councils who may may not have, in fact, the same resources or concerns about funding like this and have them vote it down for the wrong reasons. So I would really like to see the demographic snapshot of the local government sector that Councillor Greco has so rightly put forward. But I think tactically and strategically, I think Councillor Rennie's amendment actually makes a lot more sense in terms of making it succeed. And if the state government doesn't fund this, then I'd also advocate some strong advocacy to the MAV to fund it. But we're not at that stage yet. We need to make the case first to the MAV.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Any further speakers? If not, I'll put that amendment to the vote. All those in favour and against? That motion is carried. So
It'll be noted that I've voted.
So Councillor Greco would like his vote noted as in opposition. That now becomes the substantive motion. So Councillor McCarthy, would you like to now speak to this motion again as the seconder?
No, I think you've said enough.
Are there any further speakers to the motion? Okay, I'll put the...
Do I have a vote reply?
I don't... let me just check. So the legal law states that neither the mover of the original motion nor the mover of the amendment has a right of reply to the amended motion. So there's no right of reply. So I'll put that, the one in purple, for those who are looking up on screen, I'll put that motion to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried. Moving now to the second motion, aged care services. Councillor Greco, would you like to move that?
Yeah, I'd like to move that.
And a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Rennie. Councillor Greco.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, I'm putting this motion again as a motion to...
Sorry, I just wanted, just to be clear, you are including the second point there that Councillor Rennie has suggested as well, as a part of the whole motion?
Yes.
Yes. So that's the full motion, 1 and 2.
That's the red part. Point
yes. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, Councillor Greco.
No, I'm prepared to accept.
Yes. Yep.
Look, again, the reason I'm putting this motion, because the MAV is the peak body, and look, and we've spoken on this, Council, and also there's been questions from the gallery in relation to aged care services. It's a big issue out there in the community. Look, I understand there's also a petition in relation to council and maintaining aged care services for the community. Why I'm putting this motion is that as we know, that by 2020 the councils will no longer be receiving bulk funding from the federal government in relation to funding home care services, and that because we're moving into, or we sort of currently are, in relation to this consumer-directed care paradigm, if you like. And what that does is that essentially it's actually a form of privatisation of aged care services, either to the NGO sector, or what we're seeing in the aged care sector is also to the private sector. And so all that comes about is that because the federal government has decided, and this is all the parties involved, have decided that under the commercial neutrality rules, which picks up on the TPP issues, is that local governments will no longer be able to support and subsidise aged care services to the elderly and to the most vulnerable. And also that the local governments will no longer be able to have the capacity to receive funds, bulk funding from the federal government to provide those services. So essentially, when you dress all this down, folks, and let's be quite frank about this, is that it is a form of privatisation, because what it does is that it passes on potentially, and many councils across Victoria and across Australia have already washed their hands of providing and delivering aged care services to the aged. This council still has to make a decision on that, and I will be pushing that this council quickly makes a decision on that and makes a commitment once and for all, whether it stays in the game of delivering home care services or not. And so what this motion does is to advocate to the federal government, who have designed the rules, if you like, the market rules that sit above councils, who have designed the rules that then do not enable councils to participate as effectively as they could in the game of providing or delivering services to the aged care community. What that does essentially is that the whole premise of consumer-directed care is based on choice. What this does is that it could potentially diminish the choice of the aged care community in receiving services from council if council opts out.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Councillor Rennie.
Thank you. Councillor Greco has covered the first part of the motion, so I'd like to speak more particularly to the second part of the motion. And that is a key concern of mine, which is that with the transition to my aged care and the increasing entry of private providers into the aged care market, what we're seeing is a drop in salaries for a largely female workforce. And whilst we have governments that speak the rhetoric of wanting to see a decrease in the gender pay gap, it's most concerning that here is a major policy piece of the government which is actually likely to see an increase in the gender pay gap, and no one's talking about that. And I think we need to make that something that is known and that is talked about. And it's actually shameful that we are moving a female-dominated workforce off decent awards and wages into lesser well-paid positions that have poorer conditions, and will result over time in women also having less superannuation, which is really relevant, particularly because much of this workforce is older women who need decent salaries so that they can have secure futures. So I think this is an issue that we need to bring to the fore. I think that we know that when these services are delivered by councils, we look after our staff and we ensure really good working conditions. That's obviously highly desirable because our community and older people in our community deserve to be looked after by staff who are themselves well looked after and well remunerated for their roles. So on that basis, I commend this motion to you and think it would be a good one to put up at the MAB.
Thank you, Councillor Rennie. Are there any further speakers? No, Councillor Rennie. Councillor McCarthy.
Thanks. Look, I just wanted to add some weight to the second part of the motion, in the sense that in Darebin we have obviously a very large aged care service provision, and I think we need to recognise that we have a commitment to the servicing of our community into the future regardless of what takes place in the federal space, and that is a commitment we hold dear. But in making that sort of a commitment, I think Councillor Rennie's point is really apt. We look at what's happened in other sectors where there has been significant structural change, and of course we need to be aware of not only those historical changes and those reforms in the past, but also the likely outcomes in the future, because this service industry in this area is only going to grow, and it is actually a highly vulnerable workforce. It is a workforce which has a large representation in the Darebin community as well. We have a lot of people that work in this sector, particularly in Darebin's north, and we will increasingly see the potential for that 16 or 17% in gender pay gap lifetime earnings widen in a whole lot of industries which are the high-touch industries. And it's not just, in fact, women from, and there's a lot of women from migrant backgrounds who find that this is an entry point into the workforce in terms of the aged care sector, but also young people as well. And I think this is where there's also the potential for discrimination and of course also the sort of abusive working relationships that can occur when you don't have those sorts of protections in place. So getting the data in place early is critical, and we need to make this the sort of issue that MAB champions when it's actually at the table with government too.
Thank you. Any further speakers? If not, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried. Moving now to the third motion, Justice for Refugees. You happy to move that, Councillor Greco? Yes? You happy to move that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Look,
and a seconder? Councillor Rennie.
Yeah.
Councillor Greco.
Yeah. Thank you. Look, this motion is quite self-explanatory. I know that at the MAV conferences there are often these types of motions of advocacy in relation to asylum seekers and refugees, but I think it's important that Darebin Council actually puts forward a motion of this nature, given the work that we do in this space. And tonight also we have the chairperson of the Darebin Ethnic Communities Council, Surian, who I know is very interested in this space, and actually the Intercultural Centre has become a place where many asylum seekers and refugees come for advice and information. So I think it's important that we put a motion like this to the MAB and to solicit support from other councils around this particular issue. What I've tried to list in the motion is some of the more, if you like, burning issues around asylum seekers and refugees as they stand now. And I just want to sort of draw people's attention to some of the key points. And one is that obviously the Australian government should abandon the current harsh and unjust policies of offshore detention. And also particularly that, and I'm not sure whether this is widely known, that there's over 160 children that are held in Nauru that should be returned to Australia. And also there are many men who have been abandoned on Manus Island with no hope, no sense of where to go, and not knowing what the Australian government actually wants to do with them. In that particular case, only about 250 have been accepted under the US deal that was done with Donald Trump and our own Prime Minister, but the rest that come from Muslim countries have been completely abandoned and got nowhere to go. The other point too is that there are solutions out there, and one of the solutions that was offered by New Zealand was to actually provide protection for over 150 people, which the Australian government completely knocked back. And also, and most importantly, there's nearly 30,000 people on bridging visas, and many of those people cannot stay in Australia once their bridging visas has expired, which creates enormous uncertainty. And I think that there's a growing cry out there in the community of having some humanity associated with our immigration policy. And I just urge councillors that given the work that we've done in this space, given the values of the City of Darebin around these particular issues, that we strongly support this motion and advocate for it at the MAB conference.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Councillor Rennie.
Thank you. This country's treatment of refugees and asylum seekers is nothing short of a national disgrace. And Councillor Greco has gone into that in some detail. But I think that it's important that we never be silent about that, and we continue to raise our voices over and over again until such time as they are heard, and that we look at advocating by all means possible. So I'm very confident that I can speak strongly to this at the MAB State Council, and hopefully we'll get the support of every council unanimously across Victoria.
Thank you. Any further speakers? No, I'll put that to Councillor Newton.
Just very briefly speak in support of this motion.
Just if you want to lift your microphone up a bit.
Sorry, Melissa. So just wanted to speak in support of this motion. I think that we saw that in the Batman by-election that refugees is an incredibly important issue to this electorate and to this community, and I support this fully.
Thank you. Further speakers? No, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Motion's carried. Moving now to the item 4, MAV promotional campaign. Moved by Councillor Greco. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Greco.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, this motion is quite a simple motion and quite straightforward motion, and I'm glad that Councillor McCarthy has supported and given me the opportunity to speak to it, and I hope that he will support it after I give him a little spiel about it. What this motion does, in my involvement with the MAV, over the years, there's always been an issue about the profile of local government. As we know, we always come under the hammer from the community, particularly if you care to listen to radio stations like 3AW and some of the shock jocks. The way that they attack local government and the way that they try to ridicule local government, notwithstanding the wide array of services and activities that local government provide, I think we need to shift something in the community to make people realise what actual local government does provide. A lot of people, when they're asked, unless they directly receive a particular service, but generally when people are asked, they only think of roads, rates and rubbish, and they limit themselves to that, unless they're involved in childcare or in aged care services or in youth. Unless they specifically receive that service, they're not generally aware of what the other services are. And I think it's high time that the MAV needs to lift up its act, and I hope that through our Councillor Rennie, she'll be able to advocate strongly at the MAV conference that the MAV assist councils, given that councils pay a lot of money to the MAV, in actually positively promoting and developing an important strategic campaign, an advertising campaign, in order to promote councils across the sector, across the community. Why that's important? One is that because it's true. We do lots of things, you know, from whether assisting refugees or providing services in the home for our aged care community. We do those things, and we need to go out to the community and tell them that we actually do these things. We're open to criticism, and we should not be scared of criticism and critique from the community. But at the same time, we should make it obvious to the community the types of services that we provide. And I think the MAV has a responsibility as the major leader for local government to actually be out there doing our work and doing our campaign and promoting local government across the sector. And I hope that this motion gets up, and I'm sure that Councillor Rennie will do a marvellous job in advocating at the MAV conference that this sort of work gets done. I haven't stated money, how much or what, because it's to leave it as open as possible, and so that, and I'm sure that other councils have this concern, and they may want to add to the
10
motion
seconds.
to make it a more consolidated motion that actually pushes ahead this type of issue at the MAV conference.
Thank you. Councillor McCarthy.
I'll try to keep it brief because Councillor Greco has covered this really well. I think we need to remember that the usage rates of council services and the value that people have from council services and council's democratic role and so on and so forth is something which we shouldn't take for granted. As Councillor Greco himself would hopefully say, you know, it is important that people understand the services that are available to them and make use of them, but particularly those services they may in fact not realise are on their doorstep and are available to them when they're in most need. And one of the services that this council, and I know other councils support, is to ensure that our emergency relief organisations have buildings, they have support, they have funding, and in our case, our funding for an organisation like Diverse, which works with some of our most vulnerable people, particularly in crisis situations. If you don't know that these services exist, and if you don't know that they're provided or supported by your local council, then you actually don't access them, and you don't actually take advantage of them in those times of need. And in fact, people can get themselves into some pretty terrible situations. So sometimes the work of council is not just through the direct services that we provide, but in fact the organisations that we get behind. I'd also say that there's probably an obvious element here, which is of course reaching out to our various cultural and linguistically diverse communities. And I think we do that reasonably well in this city. It is a challenging role sometimes because there are a whole range of different types of communication that we have to look at. But it's not something that necessarily, I don't think we necessarily always do at a state level in terms of communicating that message. So that is something which hopefully could be picked up as part of this campaign, should it be supported. And lastly, we shouldn't be going out there and blowing our own trumpet as local government. What we should be doing is providing good, accurate information to people when they need it. And that's where I think some targeted promotion in that sense would be really helpful.
Thank you. Are there any further speakers? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Questions carried. We'll just move on to the next page of motions. Okay, so these are the motions to put forward to Elgar. So the first one is Multicultural Advisory Committee. So that's moved by Councillor Greco.
If I may, just to expedite things, because many of these motions are
some of them are
almost
similar,
identical to the previous motions. So rather than getting up and talking about them again.
Yeah, that's fine. But this first one is different to the previous one, the Multicultural Advisory Committee. So we'll deal with that one first, and then we can speed up the other ones. Is there a seconder for the Multicultural Advisory Committee? Seconded by Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Greco.
Look, similar to the previous motion that was directed towards the MAV, so I don't think.
So this one wasn't. There wasn't a similar MAV motion. So this one is the.
Sorry, that's the ALGA. Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, no, sorry, folks. Yeah,
Yep.
just to look. This motion is again, it's directed to the ALGA, which there will be a conference in June or July this year, and that's an opportunity where all councils around Australia get together to discuss local government across the whole of Australia. There's over 600 or nearly 700 councils that exist in Australia, and it's a widely attended annual get-together, and there are lots of important motions that are passed by that body, which is the national peak body. What I've suggested in this motion is, again, whilst the ALGA and various council talk about multiculturalism and its importance, and what I've seen from the ALGA is that there hasn't been much action on their part in actually promoting or dealing with issues that have got to do with either immigration, settlement issues, or multicultural issues as they affect councils across Australia. Why this is important? Because it's become increasingly important in Australia as Australia diversifies, as the number of people born overseas is not diminishing, it's actually increasing. There are critical questions for many local governments, not only local governments like Darebin, which has a high concentration of people from diverse backgrounds, but also these are critical questions for the regional and some of the rural local governments in terms of how they accept or adopt people from different cultures and how they deal with the whole issue of settlement, the whole issue of immigration in terms of keeping those centres and those country towns alive. So there's a discourse there that needs to be had on the part of the ALGA in providing strategic advice and also recommendations to the board of the ALGA in relation to what this whole question of multiculturalism, settlement issues and immigration issues mean for local government. Also, why it's important is that often a lot of these issues that get enacted by federal government, local government is often picks up the actual cost of running activities or services or programs to help integrate people from diverse backgrounds. And a lot of that we do off our own back. And what we need is that at the national level, some strong advocacy, and I think that could be done by having a multicultural advisory committee that advises the board
10 seconds.
so that we can be much more strategic as a sector across Australia in providing greater positive input in relation to these important subject matters.
Thank you. Councillor McCarthy.
I don't have anything to add.
Are there any further speakers?
I have a question.
Councillor Messina.
Can I have confirmation that there actually isn't a multicultural advisory committee board at ALGA, please? I know the MAV have one because I'm on it, so I'd like to know, do the ALGA actually have one?
Does ALGA currently have a multicultural advisory committee? Does any Councillor Greco?
I know that they don't have one.
Okay, thank you.
We tried to put this motion a few years ago.
Okay.
But
thank you,
never got anywhere.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just surprised that they don't. Thank you.
If there's no further speakers, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Motion's carried. Moving now to item 2, aged care services, which is very similar to the one that we will put forward to MAV. So that is moved by Councillor Greco. A seconder? Seconded by Councillor Rennie. Councillor Greco, do you have anything further to add to the aged care service motion for the debate? Would you like to speak to the aged care service motion?
I just want to read it. Just give me a moment to reread
Sure.
it. Yep.
Yep.
I'm happy to second it.
I thought you
Happy to
move it, yep, and seconded by Councillor Rennie. Do you want to speak to it, Councillor Greco?
No, look,
No,
we've spoken
nothing
about
further
it
done?
before, yep.
Councillor Rennie? Anyone else? No, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Motion is carried. Moving now to item 3, Australian Local Government Profile. So this is where we had an amended motion last time.
I'd once again suggest the amended motion.
So Councillor Rennie is suggesting to move a motion similar to the one that we did previous. Can we get the words up for that? So Councillor Rennie wants to move an alternate motion, which is up on the screen there.
I don't think it's an alternate motion. I'm moving the motion.
You'd like to move the one that's up on the screen in black?
I think Councillor Rennie is moving an amendment to my motion.
Okay, so there's two things, because there's an alternate motion and then there's an amendment. So Councillor Greco is moving the motion that is up on screen in black. Is there a seconder for the motion that is in black?
Could we just check procedurally, Mayor? If Councillor Greco's motion doesn't get a seconder, can Councillor Rennie then propose her alternative?
She can move an alternate motion after we deal with this motion that Councillor Greco has moved. Is there a seconder for this motion? If there's no seconder, that motion has lapsed.
Seek to move an amended motion as
Alternate motion.
Apologies, an alternative motion as per the purple words on the screen.
Thank you. So there's the alternate motion moved by Councillor Rennie and a seconder. Second by Councillor Newton. Councillor Rennie.
I don't feel I need to speak to this further.
Councillor Newton.
Nothing further.
Any further speakers? Councillor Greco.
Yeah. Look, I was going to be cheeky and move an amendment to this motion to try and get the MAV to pay up and bloody fund a project like this, but. Yeah, look, I'll speak in relation to this motion. Look, I think that the motion again, and look, and I appeal to councillors, is that the motion does not go far enough. I mean, we play with language, and the language is very important, councillors, because language actually flags what the real motivation and what the real intention and the drive is to achieve change. And I'll be very frank, councillors, very frank, is that when we deal with other issues, whether it's gambling, our language is very tight, our language is very direct, because it's an important social message that we need to get out there. When we talk about the environment, our language is very tight, our language is very direct, because it's an important environmental issues that we need to address. Unfortunately, councillors, I must say that when we talk about issues that got to do with diversity, multiculturalism, our language is sometimes very vague, councillors. And I've assessed this over many years, councillors, since the 10 years I've been on the council. By the language being vague, the outcome is also very vague. I think it's about time, councillors, that we tighten up our language, make our language stronger, because that enables us to present stronger arguments. Councillor McCarthy said earlier
10 seconds.
That about being strategic and things. I think when it comes to issues like this, we have to be direct, like we have been direct with the environmental issues, like we've been direct with anti-gambling issues.
It's time.
So, councillors, please reconsider.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Are there any further speakers? I'm not sure whether Councillor Greco was speaking in support or opposition to that motion.
So could you repeat?
Were you speaking in opposition to that motion?
I'll speak for it, actually.
Okay, so there's no right of reply, and I'll put that to the vote. That is carried. Thank you.
Because I have no other option, councillors, that's why.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Now we'll move to item 4, Justice for Refugees. Are you happy to move that, Councillor Greco?
As it is,
as
we
it
discussed
is.
before.
Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Greco, would you like to speak to the motion?
All been said before.
Thank you. Councillor McCarthy.
I have nothing to add.
Thank you. Anyone else? No? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Motion is carried. Moving on to the next page. This is a MAV, back to MAV motion. They could be moved as one motion, if you would like to do that, Councillor Rennie.
Yes, I would, but can I just ask a question of the officers, because there's a point in there which is not yet clarified, which is in relation to the $100 million, which has a
Question mark next to it.
Next to it?
Yes.
And also, if I could ask why we would name the Sonoa Hydro scheme or hydro funding in preference to the landfill levy funding.
The Sustainability Fund.
Yeah.
Theo? So there's...
So with regard to the 100 million councillors, if the question is why is it 100 million, this is it's not something that's had a business case tested. The officers believe it will require a substantial amount of money, but it was really for councillors to determine whether they felt 100 million would be enough. With regard to specifically the reference to the shareholdings from the Snowy Hydro, the reason why that has been indicated as a preferred source of funds is because it's a known source of funds that doesn't have an allocation at this point. What's not clear to me, and I'd have to seek legal advice, is whether the landfill levy has been constructed in such a way that it's not possible for the government to accede to that request without legislative changes. So given the timeframes that we're working to and the rapidly changing environment with regard to the China sword policy, the Snowy Hydro seems like a bit of a windfall that the state could perhaps leverage positively.
Thank you. Great.
What would you like to do, Councillor Rennie?
Very happy to move. We could just take the question mark out from after that.
And move both of them at the same time?
Move both of them at the same time. Yes.
Okay. That's moved by Councillor Rennie, seconded by Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Rennie.
We have an enormous and growing problem in this state and, in fact, further afield in the country in relation to how we manage waste. We've conveniently been shipping it off to China and thinking that solved the problem, but it should be obvious to anyone that shipping your problems overseas never solves them, just like buying carbon credits overseas and expecting other people to do all the heavy lifting is not really a solution to anything. We need to have solutions that we develop here and that we implement here in Victoria. And we need to be responsible for our own waste, because if we're creating it, we should be fixing it and we should be dealing with it. Ultimately, it would be great if we could reduce the amount of waste we produce, but that means actually significantly reducing our consumption across all areas of life. You know, we think about waste in terms of what goes in our rubbish bin, but when we look at the waste we produce as a society, it's surplus TVs and couches and all the crap we see on the side of the road. This is all waste, and most of it ends up, and much of it ends up in landfill. Having said that, every council in Victoria has been contributing vast sums of money in the form of the landfill levy, which has grown and grown over the last decade, so that the state government now is sitting on a pot of gold at the end of the stream of rubbish. And that's pretty unacceptable, because when they increased that landfill levy, the expectation was clearly that that would go into efforts to reduce waste, to manage waste, and that hasn't happened. It seems to have gone into the state government slush fund, into consolidated revenue. That's highly unacceptable. We're paying a lot of money, and I think we should actually be exploring options for much stronger action than what's been happening so far. So this motion, I think, goes beyond motions that have been put to the MAV previously. This has been the subject of a number of previous MAV motions, which have stuck to the sort of advocacy role. And I think it's clear that the state government, and Councillor Greco mentioned this before, advocacy has its limits. I think it's time to take stronger action. And, you know, I think things like seeking legal advice, looking at our capacity potentially to withhold funds and those kind of things, what are our options, and exploring that is pretty critical at this point in time. But ultimately, this is our society's problem, and our society needs to take responsibility for some of the solutions.
Thank you. Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you. I think we need to recognise that there is an enormous potential through releasing the landfill levy funds in the way that Councillor Rennie describes, which is actually the original intent of it. But we also need to remember that the previous incarnation of this government, which was the Brackenson-Brumby governments, actually had an incredibly ambitious and exciting policy at the state level, which was effectively abandoned by the Napthine and Value governments. And we haven't gone back to that much richer and more ambitious policy setting, which was, of course, the Towards Zero Waste strategy. And that strategy, which was a statewide strategy which had the lofty target of working towards zero waste, sat alongside the landfill levy, which of course we as a council were willing to accept at the time because we thought this is a good way to fund the transformative change that needs to occur in order to get rid of, obviously, this notion that we can keep producing waste and filling up holes in the ground. And you just have to look at the issues that have emerged when we put rubbish in the ground and when we create more and more landfills. In this city alone, we have a number of former landfill sites. It was actually the inability of the management of other landfills that resulted in significant risks to people. We have to look down at places like Cranbourne. And ironically, it's actually the agencies like the EPA and others who were funded partly through the landfill levy that actually weren't able to do the job in advance that they should have been able to be funded to do. So these things are frustrating because the money is there, it is not being released in the way that it's supposed to, and it is effectively propping up Treasury and Finance. That is not what Victorians are paying an extra fee at landfill for, and certainly not the reason why we're collecting the landfill levy on behalf of the state government. It is time for the Andrews government to get serious about sustainability and about cleaning up our waste stream.
Thank you. Any further speakers? Councillor Messina.
Through you, Madam Mayor. I just wanted to say I've personally toured the bundles and bundles of wastage sitting out in Dandenong in the polytrade plant. It's not a pretty sight. It sits there and sits there and nobody wants it. It's not going off to China. I just want to point out that landfill levy was at $2.23 per tonne. Today it's $63.23 per tonne. So they have a pot of gold. We want to see the pot of gold.
Thank you. Further speakers? No, if not, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Motion's carried. Just go on to the next screen. So this one is in relation to the TPP. Are you happy to move that, Councillor Rennie?
Yes, I'd like to move this, thank you.
And seconded by Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Rennie.
Yes, thank you. I'll just note that I'm only putting this as a motion for ALGA at this point in time. I think that the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement is a national issue, but it is one of great importance because some of the provisions in this agreement may actually impact on the ability of councils to make decisions and may put councils under threat from legal action from corporations in other countries that feel as though they're not getting a fair go in our decisions, whether those are decisions in relation to environmental initiatives, job procurement, or programs, and the way we generally operate our business. This is not only a big issue for councils, it's a big issue in the health sector, and there have been some progress in terms of what's proposed in relation to that. So I think we need to constantly be on alert for what might happen as a result of these agreements. Australia, for example, was taken to court over our plain packaging legislation. This is an example of corporations taking a nation state to court to protect their corporate interests against the health interests of an entire nation. And I think that's a pretty undesirable precedent that can come out of these sort of agreements. So I think it's really incumbent on local government to fully understand the picture, and that's not something councils should be expected to do individually. That's something that our national peak body for local government should get their heads around, and then they should put in place an appropriate advocacy strategy and communicate that with councils so that every council is aware of the implications of these transnational agreements on council operations.
Thank you. Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to acknowledge the question that was raised earlier by Sarita O'Malley, who councillors would be aware is one of a number of people in our community that is very passionate and concerned about this issue. And I think it's fitting that we take whatever action we can take at the ALGA level to get this on ALGA's agenda, because there is an ALGA opportunity here, which is to actually do something as a national body for local government that the national body in fact should do and should be driving and making one of its key planks for advocacy right now. So I'd like to think that by virtue of us putting this forward this evening, that we start to send that signal and provide the platform for council to be communicating on this issue more broadly. We actually have a standing position from 2015 in relation to the TPP. It was the motion that I put in that period, which was
at a very different time, in fact, because of course at that stage we were seeking to have input through local government and through at the community level into what was taking place. Negotiations have happened behind closed doors. This situation is rapidly getting away from us as a country, and the exact issues that Councillor Rennie outlined before are at very real risk of becoming reality when, in fact, things like the way in which our local government procurement can, in fact, be directly impacted by a set of negotiations that have happened at the international level. So this is a dangerous situation for local government if we are not at the table and not making a very strong case. And I think Councillor Rennie will make that case well in local government circles. But it's really up to ALGA to actually make this a priority at the national level for all local governments. And as I said before, this is something that our community, I think, feels really strongly about, certainly did when we first raised it in 2015, and I'm sure they will again.
Thank you. Any further speakers? Councillor Greco.
Yeah, look, I'm glad that this motion is being put and that we do advocate at the ALGA in relation to this particular issue of the TPP. Look, councillors, when we look at this and you unpack it, what the TPP is essentially about is that it's essentially about driving privatisation of government services as they currently exist. That's the intent behind the TPP, because why is that the intent? And it's the intent because what it does is actually it tries to diminish the role of local government and basically says to local government and also other sectors of other levels of government that you have to compete under market rules. What that means is that elected bodies, like local government or state government or federal government, are subservient to market rules. What that does is that promotes further and further privatisation of services that were traditionally provided and delivered by local governments or other sectors of government, to push those off to either to NGOs or particularly to push those off to the private sector. So it's important that we have a strong advocacy campaign in relation to the TPP. Interestingly enough, the TPP, when it was negotiated, lots of large multinationals were involved in setting up the rules or having an input in the rules, and we as local government or other tiers of government have very little input in relation to that. So, and I would finally say is that the Productivity Commission is also going down this path of advocating market rules over what local government do. And one example of that I've spoken about here tonight is aged care services.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Are there any further speakers? If not, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Motion's carried. Are there any further motions for the MAB or ALGA before we move on? No? Great. We'll move on to the second item of urgent business, which is a letter to the Prime Minister up there on screen. First, we need to accept this as an urgent item. Are you happy to move this as an urgent item, Councillor Greco, to be accepted?
Yes.
Yep. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Rennie. All those in favour? Motion's carried. Would you like to move this as a motion now, Councillor Greco?
Yeah, I'll move the motion.
Yep. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Greco.
Just very quickly, I think it's quite explanatory that what the motion says, and why I'm putting this motion is that over the last few days, as has been reported in the papers, that Peter Dutton, who's the Minister for State, the Minister that covers immigration, has made some very despicable statements in the media, and basically, which are dog whistling statements in relation to favouring one particular section of possible immigration applicants against another, and what he has said is actually been picked up by many leaders in the community, and actually the Greens leader Richard Di Natale called it out for what it was, which amounts to racism. They are racist statements by a minister, which also that the Prime Minister was not willing to reprimand both Peter Dutton and also other cabinet ministers around this particular issue. And why am I raising this here at a local government level? Why I'm raising this, guys, at a local government level? Because when you step out of council and you walk in our streets, you see people of over 120 different nationalities. Not all of them come from South Africa. Not all of them are white. And what that means is that people who are not white, or people who don't come from South Africa, when they hear things from ministers and cabinet ministers, and when they hear Prime Minister not shutting down these types of comments, it actually sends a very negative message to the community. And then we have to live with that, with the consequence of that, where people feel diminished as a result of that. Also, what this motion also talks about is ensuring that our non-discriminatory immigration policy is maintained, it stands, and that it's not diminished in any way, either by dog whistling or by ministers going off directing their departments about what could be done for a special group of people and making them jump the queue above others in relation to this. Because I say, and finally, councillors, is that maybe even some people in this room, if this was applied 40 years ago or 50 years ago, maybe some of us would not be in this room.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Councillor McCarthy.
Just quickly, the White Australia policy was abandoned in Australia, thankfully. Let's not bring it back.
Thank you. Are there any further speakers? If not, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Motion is carried. Is there any other items of urgent business? No. We'll move now to item 10.1, as we reordered the agenda earlier. So 10.1, release of the confidential Preston Market Heritage Study.
I'll move that there.
Is there a seconder? Okay, there is no seconder for that motion, so that motion has lapsed. Next is item 8, consideration of reports. 8.1, 2017-18 mid-year budget review.
I have an alternate motion.
Yep, we'll just pop it up on screen. Is that it?
I'll move this alternate motion.
Is that it?
And I call for a seconder for the alternate
Yeah, hang on, sorry,
motion.
we're just trying to work out just... Okay, is there a seconder for Councillor Greco's motion? Okay, there is no seconder, so that motion has lapsed. Okay, so we'll go back to, there's the officer's recommendation, or would someone like to move a motion?
Happy to move the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Amir. Is there a seconder for the officer's recommendation? And seconded by Councillor Rennie. Councillor Amir.
So what we have here is the mid-year budget review. So this is basically a bit of a health check at where the budget's at for 17-18. This is, I guess, quite helpful for us as we are now in the process of developing the budget for the future financial year, 18-19. What we've seen here is that mostly things are on track. There's a couple of examples where works have been delayed, and so that's why in some cases there's a surplus of funds. It's where works have been planned to be delivered and not yet happened for a range of reasons. And it's, I suppose, this capacity issue is something that is being resolved, and I feel very confident that with the new team now on board that we'll see things really on track in the next 6 months.
Thank you. Councillor Rennie?
Yes, this is really a very good opportunity for us as councillors to have a look at where the organisation has delivered projects as promised and where some things have fallen behind. We have received advice in relation to those things that have fallen behind about how much we try and catch up, how much we reallocate and expect things to be spent, and in some cases it's simply not realistic to think that works that were in the budget will be delivered even if we throw all the money at them in the world. And I think that's a really important thing to acknowledge, that if we fund things beyond our capacity to actually deliver and get the work out to the market and find contractors, then we're creating a headache for ourselves at the end of the year. We're creating false expectations with our community, and it doesn't do anyone any good. And then we get into this question of, do we carry things over, which leads to a culture where people think that it doesn't really matter if they don't meet timelines because the money will just be there next year. So this is our opportunity to have a long, hard look at what's happening in the organisation. It provides a really good snapshot. I think in some cases we've acknowledged that we were over-ambitious and we wanted to see things happen more quickly, and this is all in the context of a very significant organisational restructure, which has been put in place in many ways to make sure that going forward we can deliver everything on time and ensure that we get all the outcomes we want at the end. Having said all that, I think this is a really positive budget too. We're not behind, we're not in debt, we have some money that we've been able to allocate into a future fund to make sure that really major infrastructure projects of the type our growing community is going to need in 20 or 50 years' time are actually going to be budgeted for, and we're going to be able to afford them.
Thank you. Are there further speakers? Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Melissa. I just want to particularly talk about that I support this motion, and particularly around the Intergenerational Infrastructure Fund, because I know that we really, we've got a 4-year term, but we need to prepare for what's coming up, and I really support this motion. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor McCarthy.
I just wanted to touch on something, and I think it's really important to reinforce the value of having this report and making this decision now, because it is very easy for councils to not make these sorts of decisions, to have a large carryover, and that has happened in this council in the past. And from an accountability and transparency perspective, I actually think it's a really bad thing if you don't do that. So by bringing this report both into the chamber to make this decision, and of course to make the budget adjustments at this time in the year, means that we don't get to the end of June with a whole lot of money sitting that couldn't be spent and expectations in the community not being met. But there's also another story to tell with this, which is that there are projects that from time to time actually can be brought forward, or in fact require additional funding because the scope has changed. And that is where we have the opportunity to make the adjustments that are outlined in the attachment. That is all there and available for the public to see, and that is really important. These aren't decisions that get made behind closed doors. These are decisions that we bring into this chamber, we vote on them, and of course people have the opportunity to make submissions if they're not satisfied with what is proposed. I would also point out that in a period where we are wanting to make a significant difference, there is a difference we've made in terms of some key projects. We've been able to plant significantly more trees this year because of these adjustments. They're the sort of things which we can do quickly, and we can bring forward elements of a larger program because we know that we've got the workforce available, we've also got the time frame available, and we can get it done before the end of the financial year. So this is, I think, a really good template for the sort of efficient and responsive budgeting that we should be doing as a council going into the future. And we said that we would do that in the council plan, and this is an example of it. So I'm really proud that we're adopting this tonight, and I think it bodes well for the future for us.
Thank you. Any further speakers? Councillor Greco.
Yeah, look, for the sake of the debate, I'll be speaking against the report. Having said that, I acknowledge what the purpose of the report is and what it tries to set out, and also acknowledge that the report tries to make transparent something that's very important on council, what the council achievements are in relation to our listed activities that we put out there to the community in terms of what we expect to do. But I'll be speaking against it because I feel that this report, and I'm really sorry that councillors did not allow my motion to lapse, because it would give me an opportunity to to discuss the points of my other motion was that I think the report lacks rigour. And because what the report talks about is that, firstly, it talks about setting up an infrastructure, a capital infrastructure fund, and I'm all for that. And I think because we have big projects ahead of us. But we don't establish an infrastructure fund just by 2 lines in a report. I think it's incumbent on the council to actually explain to the community why we're establishing a capital works, a major capital works infrastructure fund. And I think it's incumbent on the council to put that into a report, as Councillor McCarthy said, to make things much more transparent than what they currently are. I don't feel that the report has the rigour and has the transparency that it ought to have. Furthermore, I'll go on to say that whilst the report on other aspects provides information, but I think what it highlights, and we have to call a spade, councillors.
10 seconds.
If we say at the beginning of a financial year that we're going to commit X amount of resources, and then we cut short on that because we can't deliver it, right? And what does that say of a council?
That's time, Councillor Greco. Thank you. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Amir, would you like the right of reply?
I guess I'd like to say in response that, as we've talked about earlier in the meeting, this is a period of transition, and as with any period of transition, there's going to be a bit of an awkward bit. And this is the awkward bit when we move from the way that budgeting was previously done to this new budgeting approach, where we can be confident that we are going to deliver what we set out to deliver, and we have a really strong culture in here of sticking to those commitments. The suggestion made by Councillor Greco in the former motion around Reservoir Leisure Centre is something that's under consideration for the coming budget, along with many other projects which are being considered. And I just want to echo the comments of Councillor Newton and Councillor Rennie around how exciting it is to have this new major capital works reserve for intergenerational infrastructure assets. Some of the things that this might be used for have been discussed publicly. So one, for example, might be the redevelopment of the Northcote Aquatic Centre. To do a major redevelopment of that centre would cost a lot of money, similarly for Reservoir Leisure Centre. And at the moment, we don't necessarily have the structures in place to be able to plan for those really, really big projects that may need to be funded over more than one single council term. So I'm excited that we will now have those opportunities to plan not just for now, but for many decades in the future. And I also absolutely commend the work of Sue and her team for finding ways to be able to kickstart that fund to put us in a good position for when we need to make those decisions for those really big projects.
Thank you, Councillor Amir. I'll now put that to the vote. All those in favour and against?
I abstain.
And abstained? Yep. Okay, that motion is carried. Next item on the agenda is 8.2, Planning Scheme Amendment C161, Fairfield Village Built Form and Heritage Controls. So moved by Councillor Rennie, seconded by Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Rennie.
Thank you. I'm delighted this report's come before us tonight because it's a culmination of a lot of work that's occurred, and I thank the council officers who have worked for months in putting this together, and particularly I thank community members who have been part of a reference group that's really come on a journey with us when we think about what Fairfield might look like into the future. So the new planning scheme amendment is intended to ensure that we have a vision for Fairfield that protects the history and character of the precinct, whilst also enabling development, which we know is coming to suburbs. And this is a really great example of where we've been able to get in and do this work prior to the sort of outburst of development. So we're not playing catch up, we're ahead of the trend, and I think that means that we're going to be able to see really good quality development, and we're going to see development that respects the character and the buildings that are existing. And so what this does is it looks at the street frontage of Station Street in particular. It looks at the sort of buildings that are there and what makes that visually appealing and what creates the character in that street. And it thinks about, if development were to occur in this location, How could it occur in such a way as to maintain that? What should the built form look like? How high should the street wall be? What should the setback look like? What height is appropriate? And those are all really important questions if we want to have a Fairfield in the future that is as loved and as welcoming and has the sort of character that it has today. So significant community consultation has occurred. There's been a reference group, but in fact the next step is that we request from the Minister of Planning that they authorise Darebin in preparing the amendment, and that amendment then go on exhibition for 1 month. So that's a further opportunity for the community to have a look and to have some input. And it would also introduce some heritage overlays which protect particularly significant buildings in the area. This is all quite a lengthy process, and I think that it's an example of the sort of process that you have to go through when we talk about amending the planning scheme. It's not something you can do overnight, say, well, it's this now and we want it to be this, and we can just do that. So it's an ongoing step in the process. We've had other motions come before us in the past, and having been part of the Fairfield Village Reference Group and sat around the table with people, I feel as though the direction that we're going in is a good direction, and that it's one that will be broadly accepted by the community, because we've really taken the time to bring the community on board.
Thank you, Councillor Rennie. Councillor McCarthy.
Councillor Rennie's covered it really well, and I also want to commend the work of both the officers and the community members, both local residents, traders and other people who have an interest in both the past, the present and the future of Fairfield, because it is a village precinct. And one of the things that I recall before I entered council was in fact that council was looking at something very similar, but in a far more, a much earlier stage and a very different environment in terms of Fairfield and particularly Station Street. And that was back in 2007, 2008, where the concept of some height controls were being considered a structure plan, but certainly not in the environment that we find ourselves now, where we have found some large applications, some approved by council, some approved at VCAT, and some that have sat well and some that haven't sat well with the community. What this proposal offers, and I think if supported by the Minister to go to the next stage of formal exhibition, is to provide the sort of certainty that our community both expects and desires. And what has been interesting in terms of the considerations around the group to get to this stage is that when we haven't got it right, the group has told us, and we've gone back to the drawing board and worked again, and our officers have done a fantastic job in trying to find the balance between the different priorities in the group, and particularly to try to understand what is it that actually makes Fairfield, and particularly Station Street, special. What are the things that must go forward? What are the things that we actually want to change? And so obviously improvements and enhancements that council is in charge of in the pedestrian environment and the streetscape environment we cannot control, but building heights, structure and form, and of course heritage is actually something which we need planning controls for.
10 seconds.
And that's what this will deliver. So I really encourage people to get involved, even those who haven't touched it until now, and certainly make a submission in favour of the controls.
Thank you. Any further speakers? Councillor Newton.
Very briefly, thank you, Melissa. I want to echo Councillor Rennie and Councillor McCarthy's comments and commend the officers who've worked on this planning scheme amendment. I think this is such a special part of our city, and I think it's so exciting that we're seeing innovative apartment development such as the Nightingale development coming up here across the road from Fairfield Station. And I think this particular amendment does exactly what we want to do for the whole city, which is both protect what's special about particular areas and allow for growth in the right areas. I really like the part of the report that talks about that the amendment will support the establishment of new housing and commercial opportunities in Fairfield Village to strengthen the economic viability of the centre, while heritage protections will ensure that change is managed in a positive way and does not come at the expense of the character and the village atmosphere of the centre, which is distinguished. So I think this one really hits the mark. I'm very happy to support it.
Thank you. Further speakers? If not, put that to the vote. All those in favour? Motion is carried. Item 8.3, Darebin Creative and Cultural Infrastructure Framework and Implementation Plan. Moved by Councillor Messina and seconded by Councillor Newton. Councillor Messina.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through you, Madam Mayor. Sorry. I am delighted to move this recommendation to support the officer's report. Firstly, I want to thank the hard work that's been undertaken to produce this report. I no doubt there's many, many hours and weeks that have been undertaken. This report excites me, and I'll tell you why. It's because it's due to the economic and social value that makes my heart pound when I read this report. Life is like a box of chocolate, and at times an exquisite one. Like a work of art, we need to have the correct base, a foundation. This is our base, our foundation. I am a cultural snob. It's part of my Dolce Vita pride of life. It's a way of life for me, but please allow me to say why. Simply, it's all about the social experience. Art and culture can be as simple as marking the chalk on a school footprint to play hopscotch, the Easter bonnet parade where one creates their favourite hat, or singing the song at the carols. Artists, entertainers, musicians, photographers use their art to recite a story that captivates us and take us on an adventure. Artistically and culturally, Darebin is a blank canvas waiting for a vision to take on an identity. But a creative and cultural framework is much more. This framework is a strategy that states that art and culture is an important key element in our community, an added component that adds to the inter-community connection. Arts and culture has a long history of facilitating and bringing people together from across all walks of life. It provides a platform for communities to create, maintain and share their stories and experiences. Now, you don't have to be a creative talent to engage in the arts. Arts and culture appreciation, engaging and entertaining. This is why we have social media platforms such as Instagram and YouTube, and that's why they're popular. Integrating the arts enriches individuals' lives. It's about bringing people together in the park, the museum, the concert hall or the footpath. The report highlights long-term and short-term plans, big action plans, visions and geographical trends. This is an investment, a much-needed investment. This framework has a clear, concise, strategic purpose that will reshape and define Darebin as the leader in Victoria. Darebin will be the queen of the arts and cultural precinct. I'm happy to endorse this and watch it evolve, stroke by stroke, note by note, book by book, melody by melody. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Messina. Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Melissa. So firstly, I wanted to say this is one of the best reports and frameworks that I've seen in my time on council. So I really wanted to commend Vicky and her team, the officers and the consultants that put together this framework. I was really blown away by it. I think that it's exactly where we want to head. It's broad thinking, bold, strategic and cross-cutting, and is about maintaining and increasing creativity and culture in Darebin through city shaping. I think it's far-reaching. It puts a cultural lens over council departments that may not have thought too much about culture so far, such as planning. I also love how it focuses on bringing more creative culture to the centre and the north of the municipality, and how it maps where creative culture is now and where it should be in the future. I love that it thinks carefully about how we manage to keep artists and makers in our city through considering affordable housing nearby places where makers and creatives can work. The idea for live workspaces for makers is such a good idea. I think it's amazing how it looks at the opportunities we have through the Northland Urban Renewal Precinct and industrial sites for utilising them for creative hubs. And I'm particularly excited about a new arts hub in Reservoir and how this framework looks at that. I think it's also really, really exciting about looking at opportunities for an infrastructure contribution plan to fund these arts hubs, and really thinking holistically about that. Particularly, I want to highlight that the idea about allocating 5 to 10% of budget for infrastructure projects over $1 million to artists in the creative sector, so that artists supported early to the project to deliver elements such as lighting, furniture and other installations. I love how this will make our city even more beautiful than it is already. I also love the idea of continuing to activate vacant shop fronts and council facilities and using libraries for co-working. I know now from the report that 40% of Darebin businesses are in the creative and cultural industry sector, and I really love how this framework just puts that all across the way that we do business, and I'm very happy to support it.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Any further speakers? Councillor Amir.
I also wanted to make a comment on this, not just on the content, but I suppose the process and the way that this has come about. So the arts is obviously something that's very, very important to us here in Darebin. I heard a statistic, hope it's true, that more artists live in Darebin than any other municipality in Victoria, Australia. Anyway, there's lots of artists here and we're very, very proud and excited. And one thing I really liked about this was that rather than, I suppose, getting a few ideas and then putting them together and then looking at the gaps, it really starts from the perspective of what is it exactly that we're trying to do and how do we foster the arts and what does it look like to foster the arts and support all the different components of what creates not just individual initiatives and programs and grants, but a vibrant arts ecosystem where the different parts play together. and then thinking really laterally around how we can make that happen, and thinking about all the things that can help support the arts, including some of those, I guess, like physical and social surrounding infrastructure. So not just about funding, but also things like partnerships, also looking at the geographical considerations, and looking at how we can reinvigorate industrial areas and vacant areas. And I read a quote in a book recently that said, the best ideas are ones that fix multiple problems. And I feel like this really is an excellent demonstration of that, with something like, you know, using industrial space as a new arts hub. We're not just solving challenges around spaces for artists, we're also creating public community feelings of safety, also fostering social connections, enlivening our streets and making Darebin really the kind of place that we want it to be, very vibrant and alive, not just along High Street, but in a way, an ecosystem across the municipality.
Thank you, Councillor Amir. Any further speakers? Councillor Rennie.
I'm going to talk about one of the really practical things in this report that I like, and that's the section that actually talks about how we're going to fund this, because it's wonderful to talk about how much we'd all love to live next door to an artist, and I'm lucky I do live next door to an artist. He painted a picture of another one of my neighbours, and it won the Darebin Art Prize and hangs in the library, and you know, I feel blessed to live in a community where I'm surrounded by artists and writers and creative people. But in order to achieve that, in order to be a really attractive destination, there has to be investment. And that can't all be council investment. And so one of the things I like about this report is the fact that it talks about that council investment, that direct investment, but it also talks about the infrastructure contributions plan, and then the idea of value sharing and how you build the value in that investment, as well as external funding. So the fact that if we make ourselves attractive, if we position ourselves well, we can attract more funding from state and federal governments into this area. And importantly, it talks about the fact that some of this is self-generated. And what we want more than anything is actually to have an art and a creative scene that is so thriving that artists are thriving and they're able to make a living and that they're sustainable. And I think ultimately that's really what many artists want as well. You know, as much as it's lovely getting a prize and a grant here so you can produce artwork, it's even better if you can actually sell your art, whatever that art form is, in a way that means you can have a really viable lifestyle and not be the penniless kind of artist, which is that sort of somewhat romantic, but really at the end of the day, not so appealing to the artist kind of concept. So I like that about this report, and I commend the officers for all the work that's gone into it.
Thank you. Other Councillor Greco.
Yeah, look, I'd like to say a few words in relation to this report, and I acknowledge the comments that have been made by other councillors. I think what's particular about this report is that it actually takes a very sophisticated approach to how we not only acknowledge the production of art in our city and the presence and residence of artists in our city, but how we actually can position that and promote that and further that and make it sort of an integral part, not in relation just purely of our art community, but also in relation to the economy of our city. And I think that's really important, and I commend the officers for the sophisticated approach that they've taken to developing this report. The other point I'd like to make, and I'm particularly keen on, and Councillor Newton picked up on this, is that what this report does, it actually documents, if you like, the gaps that are in the northern part of our city. I haven't seen a report like this before. We know it's anecdotal evidence that at the northern part of our city we do not have much production of art or much consumption or opportunities to consume art. And I think it's important that even though in this report, if you look at the 8 recommendations, it doesn't specifically mention the plug the gap in the north, but it's in the body of the framework report, and it's clearly articulated there. Again, why is that important? It's not just important because it's nice to spread art in the north, and one of the things that we've noticed in the data that's come to council is that gaming most of our pokies are in the north, and one of the reasons, and that doesn't provide many alternatives for people to participate in other social, artistic aspects of community life. So it's important that I'm hoping that the report, I know I'm over
Thank
time.
you, that's
I'm
time.
hoping that the report does not lose sight of expanding art production and art consumption to the northern end of our city.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Are there any further? Councillor McCarthy.
This is an incredibly dangerous report, and it's dangerous on a whole lot of fronts, and so it should be, because what it does is that it actually puts us in a position where we're making a commitment to the cultural and creative industries, and I'm not going to use the word art at all, but it makes a commitment to the cultural and creative industries in a way that I don't think we've actually done before. Because a lot of the cultural and creative industry activity that happens in Darebin is incidental. It's not by design by council, certainly not designed by our planning scheme. In fact, sometimes it's actually in direct defiance of the rules that have been set up locally and economically. The one exception to that, and I would just put a note in here, is that this council embarked on something about 8 years ago, which was to set up the Active Spaces program, and I was really pleased. It took 3 years to get that through the chamber and funded, and it now is part of council's operations that we do not accept the notion that a streetscape can have a whole range of vacant shop fronts that kill the other businesses because they are the missing teeth in the smile. We have a dedication and a commitment, and we fund this through council to ensure that when a shop front becomes available, the real estate agent calls council and says, give me an artist, give me a maker, I need to fill this space, I really want to rent it out and get a return for my property owner. So I was really pleased to push that through a number of years ago without this policy in place. Why I say this is dangerous is because this unleashes a whole lot more of that stuff, and it means that we start to be far more, I think, interventionist when it comes to both developers and industrial sites and precincts, where we say this development has no cultural component, and it positions our planners to actually advocate quite directly to say, where is the art bit in this thing? I used the word art once. Apologies.
Thank you. I think everyone has now spoken to the motion, so I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour? Motion is carried. Thank you. Next item is 8.4, Northland Urban Renewal Precinct Communications and Engagement Plan. Someone like to move a motion?
Oh, Northland. Yep. Recommendation.
It's moved by Councillor Amir. Yes?
Yep.
Seconded?
Happy to second.
By Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Amir.
So the Northland Urban Renewal Precinct, for those who haven't heard us talk excitedly about it before, is around Northland, backing onto Darebin Creek. There's really great opportunities in this space. Basically, we're hoping to build a new suburb where people can live and work, have a whole lot of new jobs, maybe even new public transport and new social and environmental opportunities for projects such as community solar, co-working spaces, and a trial site for other ingenious things we want to test. What we need to do in the process of developing that, though, is put a more detailed plan together. There has been lots of consultation done for this site over the last 5-10 years, and that will be factored in. But what we have here is a much more comprehensive process that we're really kind of getting down to business to develop a plan for the site. So the communications and engagement plan includes community reference groups, workshops, working through the advisory committee, pop-ups around the site, meetings with businesses, and seeking feedback from the community through usual channels including Darebin Community News, looking online. We'll also be using TW Blake Park, which is the biggest opportunity in terms of green open space for that area, as a little bit of a test site or a catalyst project to look at what can be done, moving beyond the traditional consultation methods and talking to people about, what have we got here, what do we like and not like, to, I guess, a broader, bigger scope of thinking about people, place and planet. And so I really hope that with this project that the community will join us in thinking really big and broad and not just looking at what's there now, but imagining what could be right there and hopefully making it the best suburb it can be.
Thank you, Councillor Mear. Councillor McCarthy.
Yes, I think what's really interesting about this is the depth and breadth of community engagement that's proposed and committed to by this report and this proposal actually sets us in exactly the frame that we should be with a project of this size. It's pretty rare in a built-up inner urban area to be talking about a new suburb. And so when we do that, we need to be talking about the types of conversations that we're going to be having that not only have to be meaningful in that way that we talk about in local government, but actually have to be directed towards giving us the advice, keeping the engagement alive, but also doing exactly what Councillor Amir said, which is actually giving people a taste of what could be to come through a completely different set of development principles, and that is the people, place, and planet principles that have been proposed. The first time that we would be looking at a precinct in Darebin as far as possible, a hyper-sustainable, self-sustaining in many respects in terms of its waste and water systems, and of course, obviously highly pedestrianised as well. I do want to touch on one thing though, which I think is a really important point in this approach, which is that by starting work at TW Blake, we're doing the opposite of what is now happening in outer urban and new developments on the urban fringe, which is that the houses get built and then the services and infrastructure come later. We're actually doing the other way around, which is that we're looking at through TW Blake is how do we create that exciting and engaging space that actually brings people together to actually think and understand about what that transformation might look like. So it is terrific and it bodes well, but it's actually the engagement piece which this report delivers. And I think when you're doing something big, you have to do it well, and that's what we're committing to do. Dangerous again.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Further speakers? Councillor Greco.
Yeah, I'd like to say a few words in relation to this. This particular communication engagement plan, it's very important that we embark on this work. And why it's important, because if you look at the report, and what we're talking about here, we talked about it's going to be a new suburb, but if you think of the numbers, I mean, it potentially could house about 20,000 new residents. We expect to expand in the next 2 years in the city of Darra by 40,000 new residents. So half of those residents will be absorbed in, if you like, in this new suburb. So it's important that we engage in a community consultation process in regards to this project. Why is that important? It's important because given that it is essentially a new suburb in our city, I think not only are the residents around that particular area should have a say, but also the whole community, if you like, should have a say and a vision for what we want to see in that particular space. And also is that, and we all appreciate that planning is a very, very complex area to deal with. But at the same time, we should not just leave it to the planning experts to determine what the vision should be. The vision should be determined by the community. The planning experts then fill in the technical know-how in making sure that happens. Also, why this is important that we engage in a consultation, because we need to hear from the community what they want for that area. Because if we get it right and we put in the right planning controls, it would diminish then future objections and the heartache that we see downstream
10 seconds.
if we get it wrong. And I'm looking forward to the consultation, that we get that input from our community.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Are there any further speakers? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Motion is carried. Next item is 8.5, Mid-Year Council Plan Action Plan Progress Report. Moved by Councillor Rennie. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Rennie.
The recommendation here is the Council notes the mid-year Council Plan Action Progress Report, which is very simple and easy recommendation, as it were. But I'd just like to say that noting it is one thing, but it's worth noting that it is 38 pages long, and there is so much information in here. I felt I couldn't read it on screen. It's one of the few documents I had to print out because it's a real delight to read. And in some ways, when we develop the council plan, it's a brief document, it's a couple of pages. We don't always know and can't always anticipate everything that will be captured within that plan. Similarly, when we develop the annual action plan, it's got some aims and goals and big ideas, but it's in reading this report that we can actually appreciate how much work has gone on in council across so many different areas. And they're listed against each goal. And certainly it captures some of the big things, the sort of flagship items like the establishment of Climate Emergency Darebin, which was previously Darebin Energy Foundation. It captures those big things, but it captures so much more because it contains details about the smaller things that are also happening. The road resurfacing projects, the playgrounds and parks that have been upgraded, the public toilets that have been built or improved. And in terms of the day-to-day things that our community notices, it's often actually those small things. They notice when they walk out the door and their footpath is redone and it's smooth and it's nice to walk along. They notice when they go down to the local park and there's an accessible toilet. And that's what I love about this report, and I hope many members of our community will actually take the time to read it. And I really look forward to the annual report. This is just a mid-year snapshot.
Thank you. Councillor McCarthy.
I think Councillor Rennie's hit the nail on the head. This is, if you wanted to understand what we've been up to, this is the document. And in fact, it's incredibly honest where things have progressed, sometimes faster than we expected, and in some cases where for various reasons, sometimes it's external factors and sometimes it's things that we've decided to put a hold on. We've actually said, no, that's actually not the priority right now. We're going to do things a little bit differently. And so that's really what this is. It's an accountability document, but also a report on successes and achievements. I think the thing that's really interesting about this is we talk a lot about council having 100 services, and we talk about the 12 or 1,300 staff that we have at any time and the range of impacts. But what we're talking about here is our progress report of the commitments that we made in this chamber through the council plan last year. And that is actually what this is it's our report card. There are all sorts of local government indicators that we have to deal with, but this is the one that we made to our community, and this is the progress that we've made so far. So I won't keep going into it, but I would say that there is particularly our first goal around our climate action and our sustainability piece has actually been picked up by other councils. I was at a local government conference on the weekend, and people were talking about the particular commitments we made and how they might incorporate those in their mid-year adjustments to their reports. So that is exciting when you're having an impact beyond your own community. And I just would commend all the work of the officers to bring this together, and the fact that this is actually public and in the chamber is a really important part of this process.
Thank you. Are there any further speakers? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Motion is carried. Next item is 8.6, CT 2017-247, Simpson Street, Northcote Road Rehabilitation.
I'll move that, Mayor.
Moved by Councillor McCarthy and seconded by Councillor Rennie. Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you. As councillors would be aware, we took the decision to start bringing as many of our contracts and decisions around commissioning work into the public and into the chamber, and this is another example of that tonight. In previous terms of council, these sorts of things would have been dealt with in confidential business, and in fact residents in the community wouldn't have been able to see often the considerations that took place. But we've taken a really strong position, as we've outlined in fact in the council plan, to bring this stuff into the chamber so that people understand the rigour, the processes and the investments that we make. In this case, the recommendation obviously is following a tendering process. I won't go into all the detail, it is there. It is a significant proposed contract that we are putting forward here for Simpson Street in Northcote. And of course there is the relevant contingencies included as well. So I'm happy to support the recommendation, but I once again would say that it is really valuable to have this information out in the public, and I think that more councils should consider doing it.
Thank you. Councillor Rennie.
Nothing to add.
Thank you. Are there any further speakers? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Motion is carried. Next is item 9, consideration of responses to petitions, notices of motion and general business. 9.1, Ilma Grove Northcote Road rehabilitation.
I'll move.
Moved by
recommendation.
Councillor McCarthy. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Rennie. Councillor McCarthy.
Look, the recommendation's there. Nothing really to add. So.
Councillor Rennie.
No, nothing further.
Further speakers? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Motion's carried. We've done item 10. So item 11 is reports of standing committees. There are no reports. 12, records of assemblies of councillors. 12.1, assembly of councillors held. Moved by Councillor Newton. Seconded by Councillor Messina. All those in favour? Hang on, just one. Oh, okay, sorry. We'll go back.
Thanks.
You would like to move it with an amendment?
Yes, can I move it with an amendment, please? So I was actually at the meeting on, sorry, give me 1 second. So my name isn't listed on the Assembly of Councillors for 14th of February, and I was there because it was Valentine's Day and I remember that. So
we were all there.
And also just on the 19th of February and the 21st of February for Arts Ambassadors, my name's listed as Susan rather than Suzanne, so it's just a couple of corrections.
Okay, so you're happy to move the motion with those?
With those amendments. So yeah, it's just adding me to the meeting on the 14th of February and just checking that my name is listed as Suzanne.
Thank you. And so Councillor Messina, you're happy to move that motion? Yep, okay. Right. So all those in favour? Motion is carried. Next is item 13, reports by Mayor and Councillors. You should have that in front of you. I have one slight change that I missed. That I also attended the Kingsbury Bowls 40th birthday celebration. Oh.
And I can verify you were there with me.
Councillor Messina did an excellent speech that night. So would someone be happy to move that with that change? That's moved by Councillor Messina and seconded by Councillor Amir. All those in favour? Motion is carried. Item 14, consideration of reports considered confidential. There are none, and we're at the end of the meeting. Thank you everybody who stuck it out until the end. It was a long meeting tonight, so thank you. And there should be some tea and coffee in the room next door if you'd like to hang around and have a chat. Thanks.